get underway. My name is Amy Janess. I'm programming coordinator at the Nantucket Atheneum, which is the public library on the island of Nantucket. And I welcome you this evening. A couple housekeeping things. Janet and Ed will be taking questions at the end. So as we go along, if you think of a question or you have a comment, please, by all means, either put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A, and we'll let them stack up there and then answer them in the final kind of 2/3, 1/4 part of the program. And I'm just going to say a couple of words by way of introduction, and then we'll get underway. So Ed Hajim, a longtime Nantucket summer resident of 35 years, is a seasoned Wall Street executive with more than 50 years of investment experience. He's held senior management positions with the Capital Group, E.F. Hutton, and Lehman Brothers before becoming chairman and CEO of Furman Cells. He's currently chairman of High Vista, a Boston-based money management company. Ed is a graduate of the University of Rochester, where he later served as a trustee and board chair. In 2008, he donated $30 million to the university to be used for scholarships and an endowment at the Edmund A. Hajim School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. On Nantucket, Ed is a founding trustee of the Nantucket Golf Club Foundation, which has awarded full scholarships to Nantucket high school seniors for the past 16 years. So please join me in welcoming, oh, wait, I forgot a person, sorry. So Ed will be joined in conversation by Janet Forrest, who is my colleague. She's a program coordinator at the Nantucket Atheneum, where she plans and executes events for the library. In addition, she's the proprietor of Coaching by Janet Forrest, where she works with clients as a motivational life coach. So please join me in welcoming Janet and Ed for what I'm sure is going to be a fascinating conversation.
Thanks, Amy. So Ed, let's dive right in. I think my first question is, why did you write this book and why now?
Why did I write the book? First of all, my wife and my 3 children said, we've got to have a book for our children and for the grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And then as I was chairman of the board of the University of Rochester, they started digging into my background. They said, we're just not going to live with this, lack of information. So I embarked on the, I'm going to call it the JIRA. It was really a real trip. And when the first galleys were done, in fact, I didn't write my personal childhood. My daughter had to write it. I had a great deal of difficulty going through the old letters and having to relive all that particular period. I just basically buried it when I was 18 years old, and I really put it off. And to go back through it was very difficult. It's a little bit easier now, but she did the first draft, and then I finished up with my business career, and then I sent out the galleys to people, and I said, no, you can't keep this just for yourself. And then a publisher came along and said, I'll publish it for you. And so it seemed like, that was the flow. That's what one should do. And then as I started to write it myself, I started to learn about why I did things, how I did things, how my childhood affected the things that I did. Then I started to see lots of little lessons that I might pass on. And you said, why now? Well, when you're 85, what else do you do? No, it was a time, it's been the right time. I mean, I buried this background for nearly 65 years. And when I'm in my early 70s, I started to realize maybe I've got a message that'll be useful to young people and to some people who are in job transitions and so forth. So it seemed to me logical. And as I put it out, I started to get very good feedback. And, like any business or like anything you do, when you start to get the thing going in the right direction, just keep going. And that was the reason. But I must admit, I learned so much from writing it. I really writing things down and searching questions like, why did you do this? Why were you angry? How did you redirect your efforts at certain points in your life? So I'm very much in basically getting things written down and looking at them. First of all, very difficult to find what you really want to communicate. And when you get done with that, you try to figure out whether the person reading it is actually going to get what you're trying to convey. Yeah. That's very hard. Yeah. And then, of course, I had some people help me as well. And you have to get the right kind of person to help you. I had a wonderful ghostwriter. And she said, she threw my first book away and said, I'll make you a bestseller. And when she got done, she wanted too much drama. She wanted me to hate my father, which was a much more of a dramatic thing. I love my father, even though he abandoned me a number of times. And so I lost her and went started with another ghostwriter. And so it really took almost 7 years.
Yeah.
But I ended up with 3 manuscripts. And so I hope when this one goes reasonably well, I'll put a second one out.
Yeah. It is. It's a remarkable story. I really, really enjoyed it. And something I saw throughout it is this idea of kind of going in and keeping some secrets, like leaving some of your identity behind, trying to fit in, especially when you show up at Rochester with your leather coat and you're trying to get in fraternities. And then finally you realize, oh, I should get a haircut and maybe borrow a suit from a friend. And so it was a lot about keeping secrets. And now you're at a point where you're really revealing those secrets. And I'm wondering what it's been like for you.
It's wonderful. I'm dealing with a group in Boston called Wiley, which deals with foster kids. And I want to convey to them that the freshman year is hell. You know, not only do you look different, you feel different. And then when you get rejected by all the fraternities, you know, that doesn't work so well. Then you go into the calculus class where you were a math whiz in high school and you're kind of ordinary. And then you get a D on your first English paper. And then your roommate doesn't talk to you. You know, but I mean, even the first day when I was walking out, I had euphoria for about a half an hour. I was carrying my suitcase with all the wrong clothes and watching, you know, mothers and fathers load their kids into their dorm rooms. So I went down pretty hard right away. And then rush week was before school in those days, and all the fraternities rejected me. And that was a big deal at that time. But, you know, I convey to these kids, you got to get through your freshman year. It's hard because they don't flunk out academically. You flunk out socially. In fact, my roommate did flunk out socially. He just couldn't get along. He was a physics major and didn't like anybody, wouldn't communicate with people, and he left. And so I find that if I can get these kids to understand that it's going to be kind of a rough road, and then the real decision when you get to college is, are you going to let it all hang out? Some people do that today, more so today than before, or actually bury it and become a new person. Get rid of the leather jacket, cut your hair, get a tweed jacket, or borrow a suit, you know, and so forth, and sort of fit in a little bit better. And then you kind of go along. There was a real interesting transition, and I recommend that to kids making an overt decision. And what one person said to me is wonderful. A little bit of denial never hurts. You know, not having to explain living in orphanages and foster homes. And my father was a merchant marine. We lived in a post office box in San Francisco. My mother died when I was 3. End of story. You know, and then I went on. Then I become, you know, a college person. What did I do at the school rather than what I'd done prior to that? So I think that was a very positive experience for me. And I try to pass that on. You have a decision. Now, today, kids tend, and they have much more, they have counseling. They actually, you know, I was probably the only orphan or the only really poor kid at college in those days. Poor kids didn't go to college. They went to most of the kids in the orphanage went to public colleges, which were free in those days or very, very inexpensive, or worked. So I was unique in that respect. And, you know, it's very hard being so different.
Yeah. Yeah. Since we're on the topic of college, I was going to get to this later, but I'm sort of excited about it. For those who are local, and even people that are seasonal, you probably know that the Nantucket Golf Course does a really wonderful thing every year where they send 2 Nantucket high school graduates to college. And what I always found so interesting about this is it is basically a blank check. You don't tell them where they should go to school, what they should study. It's their money. You've seen they're qualified and they're capable, and you write them a check and off they go. And I'm wondering what went into the decision making when you decided to do it that way, and why was that important?
My total philosophical, well, I would say a very large portion of my philanthropic efforts have been in education. I believe education is a solution to everything or almost everything. And therefore, and then scholarships changed my life. I was sitting in my senior year at Roosevelt High School, and I was convinced I was going to get the New York State scholarship, and I didn't get it, which was a disaster. But I applied to the NRTC scholarship. They only give out 1,200 of those across the country. I got one of those, and I can still remember reading the letter, you know, saying that I've been accepted as an NRTC scholar, and I go to any one of 52 colleges, you know, and so that changed my life. And so all my life, I mean, I started giving scholarships 30 years ago, maybe longer. Little tiny ones. I gave a a $200 book scholarship to 10 students at Westchester Community College in the late 80s. And then when I was the chairman of the board of trustees at Brunswick School, local boys' school, I gave a scholarship there. And first of all, there is something about scholarships to me that really, not only do you do a great service to people, you change their lives, makes you feel good. Let me just give you one minor example. One of my scholarship students at Rochester is a 5-foot high, 100-pound young lady who basically became an optical engineering major. And she's a concert pianist and a concert violinist. She also dances in the Irish dance group. And now she's a PhD in optical engineering. She got her MBA in her spare time. She's getting married, and she teaches part-time, works for a company. And she stood up in front of 100 people and said, "If it wasn't for you, Mr. Hajim, I wouldn't be here." It's a long answer to when we started to think about changing the Nantucket Golf Club from a golf club to an institution on the island. We decided what charity we want to go, and the children's charity sounded so good to us. It wasn't just me. It was a lot of all the 3 directors sat around and said, "This is what we ought to do: is really become something to support the children." And again, our scholarships was one of the ways to do that. But we do contribute to 40 or sometimes as many 50 other charities on the island. And to top it all off, which I'm so proud of, about 3 years ago, we went to the principal of Nantucket High School and said, "How do you like these scholarships?" And he said, "They're great, but half the kids, maybe more than half, don't go to college." And so we started on something called vocational scholarships. Now we have chefs and welders and carpenters and tech. And I believe, it's harder to get an appointment with your plumber than it is your doctor. So we need more plumbers. We also need people to express their passion. I don't know. We have a wonderful guy that does our electrical work. He's the happiest man in the world. He's doing what he wants to do, or what she wants to do. And the chefs, you go to chef school, it's $40,000 a year. And I've been involved in chef because of the Nantucket Golf Club and also down at Ocean Reef. And there's nothing happier than a chef that's doing something special. He's not really working, or she's not really working. And we have a cooking school down in Ocean Reef, and I just love to see the young people in that particular. And Johnson Wells is $40,000 for that's you can't really afford it. And we have now a couple of chefs, and and these kids will come back to the island too. So we're really excited about it. I mean, and I don't do the work there. I mean, Tommy Brissett has a committee. It's very serious. Oh my God, I don't think I could get one of those scholarships. They run them through the mill so hard, but the kids are just very impressive. So it's something that I've done all my life, and I'm so glad that the Nantucket Golf Club has also picked it up and has done it. But it was a group effort at the club, and everybody's excited about it. And the vocational scholarships, we only give 2 scholarships because they're very expensive. We've given 8 vocational this year. And I don't know how many we're going to get to, but it's a mini crusade of mine. I'm working with other organizations around the country now to see where they have more vocational scholarships.
Yeah. What's been remarkable the last 2 years, the silver lining of COVID, is that normally the ceremony is the kids and their parents and at the golf club, which is really lovely. They've been doing it through Zoom and airing it. So now the whole community that's watched these kids from like little to all through high school, we get to be there to find out who got it and really learn about these kids that are just so remarkable. And then see this moment that really is quite meaningful.
And not only 2, I think we give, 5 or 6, the people come in second, third, and fourth, and fifth. We give them a computer, and so because they worked hard and they do lose. Not one of the 2, but the gal who works with us in our house here, her daughter went to Bowdoin, and she was one of this. She got a computer from us. Now she's a Fulbright scholar. I mean, it's just so excited to see the change in lives that you can pull off a little bit of money. And we've been very supportive of the foundation. In fact, we were arguing the other day. We actually have a little too much money in the foundation. We're trying to figure out what else we can do. We helped out the Boys and Girls Club. And it's not only the charitable activities at the club, it's the people. And I talked to you beforehand. It's Mike Roberts at the hospital. It's Janet Sherlin at Nantucket Historical Association. It's Joan Gully at your place. And I spent 10 years on Nantucket Conservation Foundation. So we've supplied people that are willing to contribute quietly too. It's a quiet contribution.
Yeah. Going back to your book for a moment, the theme throughout is as soon as you saw some success, it really was ingrained in you, and it was just part of who you are, is now it's my turn to give back. I get something and then I pay it forward or I give it back. And I'm reading actually another book right now about someone who also came from very humble beginnings, earned a lot of wealth, did really well for himself, and kind of kept it and went in a very self-serving direction. And I'm just wondering, what is it in you and what keeps you grounded and focused on giving back and being generous?
Oh, I'll be very cliched. You never give anything away. You always get back much more than you give. No, seriously, man. I get letters from my scholarship students at Harvard, at Denver, at Vermont, Brunswick School, the kids here. I mean, you get so much out of that, and it really isn't expensive. I mean, I would. It's not only scholarships. You can do other things with your money, and I gave the science center at Brunswick School. They needed a science center, and I changed the whole science program. So. And you can't take it with you. I have a good friend of mine, when he gave a speech once, that he was 75 years old. He said, I did a big study over the last 5 years, found out I couldn't take it with me, so I'm going to give it away. And I didn't quite do that study, but I find great deal of satisfaction. I mean, and at certain points in your age, I mean, I have this what I call 4 parts of life: self, family, work, and community. Community is giving back. At some point in your life, community becomes almost the most important thing. I can go on and on about this. I worked for, as you listed, E.F. Hutton, Lehman Brothers, and Furman Cells. They no longer exist. The kids that were giving scholarships today will be here a long time, be around for a long time. Or my school at Rochester, the Hajim School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Tremendous satisfaction. What do I think the country needs? It needs more applied science. It needs more engineers. We got plenty of science. We need more applied science. We need more engineers. So we went from 700 engineers to 1,700 engineers. We've gone from almost 10% women to 35% women. The dean of the Hajim School of Engineering is the first female dean in our history. So breaking ground like that and she's fabulous. She's an MIT graduate, and because she was a woman, she didn't get it because she was a woman. She got it because she was terrific. Wendy is a spectacular person, and she's changing the school again. And the initiatives they're taking on, AI, robotics, VR, AR, all that stuff that they're doing, we need that. So those are the kinds of things you give back. Or take the hospital. It's changed. I mean, my wife wasn't feeling when we ran over there to the emergency ward. That's wonderful. Now, that wasn't the case 10 years ago. I've been going to hospital, stand in line. It was kind of a dingy sort of place. It's what Bruce Pursley did over that whole area over there. Absolutely gorgeous. And very efficiently ran us right through there, and she got good help, and we were back in the house at a couple hours. So that's what charity is all about. And if you can do something for other people, Scott Peck, my book is written On the Road Less Traveled. His book is The Road Less Traveled, and I didn't name it because he sold 20 million copies, but that didn't hurt either. But his 4th requirement is what he said. He defines love as giving back, and I think it is. Only way you express love is by giving back. You can't talk about it. You have to give back. And if you have a lot, and you've been lucky like I have been lucky, you have to really seriously give back. And of course, being brought up as I was brought up, in a Catholic environment, the old tithing, you give 10% of your money back to the church. So all those things that really sort of work. Long answer. Stop me. I go on. My daughter says you answer the questions.
No, it's great. Something I was thinking about is, you talked about luck. You've been very lucky, and I believe in luck. I believe in hard work, and also timing. And I'm wondering, your story starts 80 years ago. If your story started today, what is it about the world and the country today that would either make it easier or make it harder for someone like you to still have the American dream?
Well, it's easier because there's basically, for young people, more scholarships. There's less prejudice. And there's more opportunity. Think of the difference. I mean, let's just take women. Take my wife. When she graduated college, she could be a nurse. She could be a secretary. She could be a teacher. Or if she was tall enough, she could be a stewardess. Today, women can be anything. Can be the CEO of Citibank. But just think of all the different activity. I mean, the whole healthcare area. I mean, the healthcare area is so narrow when I graduated college. Today, it goes all the way from, the social side of it to all kinds of technological capability. We're going to have to solve Alzheimer's. We're going to have to solve all these neurological diseases. I sat with a guy today for an hour and a half, and he has something called focus sound, and he's working for 15 years on using sound to do non-invasive procedures. And he has now over 100 protocols, things like prostate cancer, thyroid cancer, all kinds of different things. That's a whole field I didn't know anything about, but it's wide open today. And there also, you have the whole international, which we didn't have when I graduated. When you decide to do something, like even tonight, you said there might be somebody on here from Australia. Mm-hmm. And so you have the whole international, and really, also in my day, you needed money to start things. Today, you need a lot less money. There's not as much bricks and mortar requirement, and there's so many areas. The digitization of the world is going to change everything completely. It already has, and now it's a little bit harder because of the fact the government's a little more involved. You probably require a little more education, and there's no more Lone Rangers. Collaboration is absolutely required. You must have partners, because anything you do is multifaceted. And when it's multifaceted, you can't have all those capabilities by definition. So that's really different. So if you're the Lone Ranger, which a lot of people think they are or were, it's much harder today to be the Lone Ranger in anything you do. And in my book, you'll find out that I believe you're only good as the people you surround yourself with. You have to have good partners.
Yeah.
So that makes it a little harder. You've got to be able to pick those people. They have to fit together. You have to learn how to basically, it's much more consensus. You're much more of a coach than a boss.
Mm-hmm.
You really are. You have to give people. I mean, in my book, I talk about my passion, which I didn't know about until I was in my mid-40s, was I enjoyed people doing better than they thought they could.
Mm-hmm.
But then as I got older, I realized I needed to not only walk that walk, but I had to go a little further. I had to make sure that I didn't worry about who got the credit.
Mm-hmm.
Because the most important thing you do when you're working with people is make sure they get the credit. And by the way, in most cases, it isn't any one person who should get the credit. It is a group of people, and you have to celebrate people. So there's a whole bunch of new techniques that people are not used to. The manager, the stern, we're going to do what I'm going to do now. That's no longer available. So that makes it a little harder, because it's nice to be able to come. And by the way, I hope that our society will continue to compete with the Chinese, because they are more that way than we are. We're still consensus. Maybe we're too consensus, but I think those are the little things that sort of the balance off. But I think there's more. I want to convince young people there's more opportunity now than there ever was before. It's only going to be limited by their imagination, how hard they want to work. You got to work hard. There's no two ways about that. You don't kill yourself, but you have to work hard. And then when you come to a problem you can't solve, you got to find a partner who can help you solve it. And I got that back when I was doing the humor magazine. One guy said, "Ed, you can't even draw a straight line with a ruler. Oh, let's get a cartoonist." And I got a cartoonist, And I
talk a little bit about the magazine. I did enjoy it.
It was the most wonderful experience in the world. In my junior year, I'm taking physical chemistry and organic chemistry. And, this is when they flunk out all the chemical engineers. And I decided the school was a place where fun went to die. And I was going to create this humor magazine like the Harvard Lampoon. And the president said no. And the provost said no. And the librarian said no. And, I put together 13 blue ribbon. I mean, these were very important people in the school, because I was on the school government. So I kind of collected all the important. They couldn't really turn me down. But then I had to get funding. And, I told people, if you really want to be successful in life, early in your life, you go out and you sell something to people you never met before that doesn't exist. This magazine didn't exist, and I'd never met the guy at the gas station or the bar or anyplace. And I sold them advertising. I hated it, by the way, and I quickly got someone to take my job, but I had to go out there first and do that. But putting people together to get that done, it was a great experience. And then later on in my life, I realized, because my Navy training gave me another whole capability of following orders. But putting those together, when I started to run companies in the financial business, I used those techniques. And all of a sudden, I came to realize, in my mid-40s, I said, this is what you're doing. You're doing it almost automatically. And people would come and tell me that, you really want me to do better. And all of a sudden, the lights went on. and if you have that, you're a counselor, you know what that does, and I believe in celebration. I celebrate people. I always have birthday parties.
Yeah. Yeah. Another skill I noticed you had is kind of knowing when to stick it out and stay and when to exit stage left. And you've had to make a lot of those decisions in your life. And I just wonder, how did you go about honing that spidey sense, I guess, that understanding of when to stay and go?
When to hold them and when to fold them.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Well, we just had a birthday, and my wife on the hat that she gave out, everybody says, "What's next?" You got to always ask what's next, especially in today's world where things are moving even more quickly. And I believe once a year, either on a beach or on a boat or in the mountains, you do a quick review of the year. What's going on in your environment. Every 3 years, you should do a very deep dive with a focus not only on what you're doing and what's happening around, but what's happening in the world. What's the context? And if you're in a business or anything, what's next? And at Hutton, what was next was putting together my fabulous research department with the banking business. The boss didn't want to do that. He said, "I'm not doing that. And I don't want you to even do what you're doing. You come here and do this other thing." And I said, "Bob, it's not going to work. You really need to fix your banking division." And he said he didn't think so. So I left and went to Lehman Brothers, and I put that into place, and it really worked. They flourished with it. Lehman Brothers, a great experience. That's another reason when to fold them. You can do everything right, and I did it for 7 years. I mean, it's in the book. I turned the securities division, this is the brokerage business, around, and it wasn't even turnaroundable. Nobody said, "You can't do that, you're crazy." And I got it done. Then they immediately pushed me out of that, and I went into this horrible money management business. Was going down the tubes. We raised $8 billion in 2.5 years, and it's in the book again. He came to me and he said, "I want to push out Pete Peterson." I said, "I'm not in favor of that." I was on the board. So he kicked me out of that division. So I did everything right for 7 years and still failed. Again, that's the time to fold them. Mm-hmm. You can do everything right, and it's still a time to leave. And in the case of Hutton, they weren't doing what I thought they should do. Hutton went down the tubes about 3 or 4 years later. And, when I left Lehman Brothers, he not only hurt me, but he hurt a lot of other people, and the firm was gone in 7 months. And then the firm themselves, it was time to hold them. This was a chance to really build a company. And we started with 20 million. We ended up with almost 500 million, a 20-fold, 25-fold increase over 14 years, because it was time to really stay there. Every day was exciting, was interesting, and unfortunately or fortunately, I was the boss. So I got a chance to do what I wanted to do. But I found other people. And again, walking the walk. I'm very proud of the fact, over a 20-year period, I paid myself the most money 1 year. Mm-hmm. So not only did I talk the talk about not giving people credit, I gave them credit. And that was very important. And they felt it, and I got that from David Kearns at Xerox. He said, "Ed, I don't pay myself the most money. I'm the CEO and chairman, but if a guy sells a lot of Xerox machines and he has a commission, he makes more than I do, that's fine." In fact, I made more than David 1 year, which he was fine with that too after they bought the company. So, it's very important to ask what's next and continue to ask that, not every morning. Stop it at the end of a year or 3 years, or if you get a good signal. I left engineering after a year. People say, "Oh, you violated your rules. You left too soon." I saw enough things there. The guy at Wharton said, "Ed, go to school full time." My buddy up at Harvard said, "You got to come here." I watched the people next to me at Hercules. I had really befriended them. They've been in business for 20 years. One morning, they weren't there. The basic company decided to get out of that business, and they just were gone, the PhDs and everything else. So I found that, that was not the kind of business I wanted to be in. And so I left and went to business school after a year. So it was time to fold them a little earlier that time. Although I loved being an engineer. There's nothing better. Well, I was in plastics before Dustin Hoffman. So,
I enjoyed that joke in the book.
They didn't even call them plastics, and I had so much fun. I could spend hours on that. That was the most fun I ever had. I had these salesmen call me up and say, "We got this plastic, this Profax. I want to make it lighter. I want to make it stronger. I want to make it, I want tensile strength increase." I'd sit in the laboratory in the afternoon, work it out, call him up, send out the stuff. He tried to call back, said, "Client loves it. We're making robot or whatever it was." But I spent a year doing that. 7 patent applications in 1 year. And it was the beginning of plastics. They called polypropylene, they called it Hyfax. and it was a lot of fun. But there was enough signals for me, and especially the concept that I really want to do the business side and not the technical side. Because I'd actually in the Navy, I'd gotten into Berkeley Business School, and I said, yeah, I spent 4 years getting this engineering degree. I really want to find out whether it's the answer or not. And that's another thing that I recommend. Slow down, huh, Barb? I'm getting signals from my wife. I'm talking too quickly, right?
I'm tracking, but I also talk quickly.
Okay, I'll slow down. And so I basically felt I had enough signals at that point in time that I had to go on. But I wanted to see whether the engineering degree was something that I should pursue. So, and that's what I recommend to people. If you think you want to do something, give it a shot. And in my book, the one thing I really loved was travel. I loved foreign countries, and I really thought I'd be an international businessman. But I was 20 years before my time. But I went to Belgium for a summer in '63 between business school. I went to Central America. I learned French one summer, and I learned Spanish the next summer. And I fully realized international business was not for me. It was too early. In Europe, it was all family business, and in Central America, the emerging countries hadn't emerged yet. They were really, and then we were 12 of us down there starting a business school in Nicaragua. And we all spoke, we got immersed in Boston for a month in Spanish, which was wonderful. We got fluent down there, but the businesses were so primitive, that you couldn't do anything. Even a couple of guys stayed, none of them were successful. And I decided that international business, I'd have to put it off. Although I did, every time I got a chance when I was even the financial business, when I got a chance to travel, I traveled. I volunteered for Japan when I was at Hutton. I volunteered for China when I was at Lehman Brothers. And even Furman Cells, I managed to put 3 or 4 foreign offices in place so I could go visit them.
Since your wife, Barbara, did make an appearance, I wanted to, well, first of all, wish you a happy anniversary, which is coming up next week. I noted that in the book.
56 years. I mean,
yeah.
It should have been 50 and out, but I missed it by mistake. And a man gets picked for murder, he should get out in 50. 56 years, and she's, partner one is the most important decision you could ever make. You find somebody you can share your life with, and who supports you and you support them. Nothing is more important. No, it really is. And it's so nice, growing old together. She's spectacular. And almost, I don't think there's a decision I made that she wasn't involved, including the golf club. She was involved in all the decisions we made, and she's a partner, just exactly like I talked about. She has certain capabilities I don't have. She knows people better than I do. That's surprising to me to admit that, but she can discern when someone's really a good person or not, better than I could. I'm always, I treat everybody too well, because I believe that if people do you in, that's the biggest gift they can give you, because then you don't have to associate with them. They show their true colors. That's been my trick. But she could tell when someone's, and that actually speeds the process up. She say, Ed, you ought to stay away from that person. He's not the kind of person you should be involved with. And she's done that 2 or 3 times in our life, and she's been right. But she's been a great partner, and we did have division of labor early on. I was a hunter-gatherer, and she did the family, and she worked for a very long time at the school. She was in charge of development in Greenwich, Connecticut, the Brunswick School. And we would walk down Main Street, and people would change the sides of the street, because in those days raising money was tough. Back in the 70s. Anyway. That's not the question you answered, but no, she probably thought that I was talking too fast. She's on Zoom too.
Yeah, I see her name on there. No, it's really lovely hearing and I don't want to give too much of the book away. It reads like a novel. It's really beautifully written, and it's so nice to hear.
By the way, I want to thank all the people who showed up tonight too. You should have started that way. My wife would have told me you missed it. You should have thanked everybody. The woman down in Ocean Reef said that it reads like fiction, but it's real life. And just like you said, it reads like a novel. Yeah.
And it's just beautiful to hear the story of how she kind of had her eye on you right away. And it took you a few years. And, but really watching
I always say,
develop.
She caught me.
Yeah.
No, she was at 13 or 14. She told her parents she was going to marry me. It's unbelievable. This is a cute story because it shows you how life is a little bit lucky. The company, we reconnected 7 years later when she was 20, 21. And not only, and I had no interest in the company in California that I was visiting, I just needed a ticket to go to her brother's wedding. And sure enough, I married the bridesmaid and spent 10 years with that company. So, luck, skill is important, but luck is essential.
Yeah, actually, and then we'll take questions from the audience, but there's a podcast I listen to called How I Built This, and he ends every interview asking the person, how much of your life and success is due to luck, and how much of your success in life is due to hard work? And I wonder how you'd balance those two things.
A good chunk is luck. The first part of luck is when you're born. If you want to have some fun, sit down for a dinner table with some friends and look at what someone lived through, like my father, born in 1900. Mm-hmm. Spanish flu, First World War, a couple good years, Depression, Second World War. After the war, wasn't great for a while. The 70s were not good. And all of a sudden, you're 70 years old. I was born with probably the smallest male cohort in the history of the country in 1936. So everything I did, there were fewer competitors. It was a terrible time. I mean, it was Depression, it was, everybody was poor. But starting in the early 80s, we've had basically 40 years of a glorious period of history, close to, the age of Pericles in Greece. I mean, we've had, 9/11 was terrible, but, not like the Second World War. Mm-hmm. COVID is the first thing that's really been significant in the last 40 years. And even the weather until I guess the last 6 or 7 years, the weather was halcyon in the 80s and the 90s. The stock market went up, 20 times. That's one of the other things. Talk about luck. I became the CEO in 1983, and we grew the company 25 times. Stock market went up 10 times during that period. So I had the wind at my back. So I would say you read the book. I sold the company the first time to Xerox on October the 1st, 1987. 3 weeks later, the market crashed. And you couldn't sell anything. Yeah. And I remember in December, David Kearns looking down at 150 Xerox managers and pointing at me, said, "There's Ed Hajim. He's our newest acquisition. Don't ask him why he's smiling." So I've had a lot of luck. And marrying Barbara, marrying someone who really cares and who put up with my problems, which are not simple. I had demons when I was younger. I still have a few, but that was a real break. And just being in this cohort, I mean, all the real estate that I bought, I was followed by this huge baby boomer group. So, the crash of 87 produced enormous real estate values all over the country. And I had this epiphany that I should buy places that someday I might live. And for a very small amount of money, I bought 5 or 6 different locations, one of which was Nantucket. The luck plays a part. You really have to be lucky. I'm one of those guys that drives to the local grocery store and there's a parking place. I'm one of those guys.
Yeah.
Drives my wife crazy, by the way. She goes
nothing like parking karma.
She takes me with her to the grocery store to find a parking place.
That's a valuable commodity here in Nantucket in the summer.
Sure is. I tell you, people pull out right in front of us. It's unbelievable.
Well, I think I'll take some questions. We do have one so far. And just a reminder to everyone, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button, or you can go ahead and put in the chat. So the first one's from Jerry, and they are wondering, I admire the length of your marriage and partnership. Do you think you could have been as successful if you had been a single parent?
Oh, I wouldn't have been. No, absolutely not. That's my life balance. If, per self, family, work, and community. If I had to spend that much more time on my family, and if you're single parent, you either fail, which is a disaster, or you spend more time and energy. See, I also have these wonderful theories that you only have a certain amount of what I call psychic energy per day. And if you use it up on children, then you don't have it for work. And then for your work won't be as good. And as a single parent, it is extremely difficult. And my father failed at it. He couldn't handle being a single parent. No, being a single parent is very difficult because you first of all have no support at all, and nobody's cheering for you. And kids are complicated. I mean, they really are, and they're all very different. I always kid about my oldest son. You could never give him enough attention. My middle son, no matter what you gave him, was enough. My daughter, 45 minutes, you're out of there. But she wanted a certain amount every night, So I could tell that, and you couldn't judge that early on. And they all are very different. For some reason, they come from the same place and they all end up being different. So you have to modulate. When I used to get in the car at night coming home from the office, and I had to either tell somebody they weren't going to get a raise or we lost a deal or something else, I had to convert myself on the way home to becoming a father. Because, you come to the dinner table and little Corey is unhappy because Jane and she didn't get along today. And it is a serious problem. And you are working with a deal in China that, happened to slip away today, and 14 people, they're going to lose their bonuses because of it. And here she and Jane, and you got to pay attention to that. That's got to be something that's very important at that moment. So you got to shift that. Now, if you're a single parent, you have no support. You do it all. So if you can't pull it off at night, then you make a mistake, and then you get in bed and you say, "Oh God, I made a mistake. I didn't treat it the way it should have been done to it." So it's hard. Single parents, very hard. I recommend to single parents that they do somehow get help. Find, if you can afford it, get someone to work with, or get another family to be close to. You have to solve that problem. Being a single parent is very tough. I think it's extremely difficult, because that's what it's all about. Is the bringing together of two kinds of capabilities, male and a female. Old school.
There was something I thought of, as you said, one of the assets you had growing up was adversity and really needing to struggle. And I'm wondering if you created struggle for your kids, or created adversity, or just made sure they understood adversity is part of life.
A great question, and a very important one. My comfortable friend said to me, "Ed, we can't live in an orphanage. How do we give them some of your capability?" I said, "Outward bound, Knowles, and work. I think it's so. My grandson spent 30 days in the rain in Alaska. Best thing that ever happened to him. My kids all worked. I can use one particular example. My daughter drove an ice cream truck one summer. There is nothing better than driving an ice cream truck. It has every aspect of any possible business you get into. First of all, you got to plug it in every night to keep it cold, and you got to sell your whole product every day. So you start selling it at full price, and by a certain time, you have to make a decision to cut the price and go someplace where you can get rid of it, because next morning, if you appear with the ice cream truck full of ice cream, they take it away from you. So then you got to buy the new ice cream every day. My son cut grass. I sent one son went to London to work in a library. I think working in a foreign country is so good, because you are totally out of your comfort zone. My single message, and my wife would love to see my answers be shorter: make your children uncomfortable. Take them out of their comfort zone. Get them to do something that. And my daughter went to Knowles. She spent 6 weeks on a kayak in the Baja with 7 other girls. I mean, great experience. I mean, these kinds of things. I went down the Green River twice with my son, in a raft, and you sit there at night and look up at there's no television, there's no radio, there's no nothing. And it's very good things like that. So it's not easy. And also, try to have a system where they're not given too much. I've unfortunately found that, but it's very hard. We live in Greenwich, Connecticut, and we had 8,000 square foot house on 8 acres and a swimming pool and a tennis court. My daughter used to tell all the neighbors that tennis court belonged to the other neighbor, So it's very hard. It's not easy. But you can, and there are some kids that are naturally good, and there's some other kids that basically, sort of take advantage of it. And you have to sort of judge that. And it's very difficult. So, but it is making them uncomfortable and getting him used to, it starts off with the chores around the house with allowance and all that kind of stuff. And also, so you have to set an example. And that usually works only, not all the time.
Yeah. I want to get to a couple more questions. Claudia asks, how do you perpetuate your values in others?
A daily activity. In the old days, it was prayer. You sit down at the table at night and you talk to everybody and you give thanks. And you recognize, try to continue to recognize that you have you've had a good life. You also try to early on understand what I call community, giving back, making sure that they recognize there is a real requirement to give back. And that's really old school. perpetuating it's very hard to perpetuate your values because they're living in a different world than you lived in. Recognize it. And I've lived in a different world than my parents lived in. Most of our parents didn't have the ability to give back. They were surviving. Reading about the Depression, and people don't realize how horrible the Dust Bowl was, and how people didn't have things to eat. They didn't have food. Even though I was in an orphanage, food wasn't great, but it was there. It's different. So it's one, and these kids are brought up totally different. So perpetuating values is and conversation. I'll be humorous for a minute. Pick the kind of vacation. And I found one, which was going on a boat in the Caribbean, small, but it's a little catamaran, 40-foot catamaran. The difference between that and a ski trip is the kids can't get away and you have to talk. And I used to give them a book to read on that trip, something that, The Secret or Who Moved My Cheese, or something that was short, but, had some messages. And then when they're younger, they sit and talk and so forth. Get older, they have a couple of beers and they really talk, and it's really a good conversation. So that's one of the ways to perpetuate, and they'll ask you questions. You can't preach values. That is absolutely out of the question. And unfortunately today, religion doesn't have as much as an impact as it did. I mean, if you went to school like I did with nuns for 5 years, golden rule by the golden ruler, you learned what was right and wrong pretty quickly, and it was preached constantly. And it was school, it wasn't home. So you understood that. And if you were a good person, you ended up in heaven. And if you weren't, where you went. And it was that little 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old makes a big impression. Now when I got to college, I was an agnostic, and I started questioning all this stuff. But by that time, certain things were those values were sort of, pretty much printed on my DNA. And values will change, but you've got to talk. It's so, and then if you can get the kids to write, it's so important. Write down passions and write down principles. What rules do you don't want? Ask your children what lines do they don't want to cross in their lifetime. And that's what I did. These are lines I'm not going to cross, because the world gets pretty complicated. That moral line gets pretty fuzzy at points in time. It gets very hard to decide, what right from wrong. But getting them to talk is one, and then getting them to write about their principles. If you read the last part of my book, I have something called, Find Your Principles. The golden rule. Freedom. What are the kinds of things that you're really going to, put things that are inviolable. They're inviolable. You cannot violate these kinds of things. And when the time comes when things get really difficult, you have those principles. But it's not easy. Values are because values do change. I mean, the values that you read about in other societies in the 20s and 30s, like Abraham in Urus's book, those were his values. I mean, he killed his daughter because she violated some rules. I mean, so things change here now, and also kids are much more sophisticated today, and they're obviously exposed. So these are complicated, and it's a very good question. And unfortunately, a lot of things in our lifetime requires more effort than it did in the old days. The old days, you said, you go to school, this is the rights and wrong, and that's it. Now it's a little more complicated.
Yeah. I want to get to a question from a young man. He is his name's Mike. He's a junior in college with an interest for business and leadership. And he wants to know, what is one piece of advice you would give me on how to build my leadership and communication skills to help me down the road?
I'll have to go back to that same 5-letter word, right. Write down what you want to do and how you think you might get there. And then therefore, what are the obstacles? What are the requirements you're going to have? And also start to look at different fields. Leadership in certain fields are very different. Leadership at the Atheneum is different than leadership in running a half dozen gas stations. So each one of these require a particular type of leadership, and writing them down and looking at what you write down. In my 4 Ps, that's the plans part. Write down your plans. Write down where you want to go, how you want to get there, and what are the real requirements. What are the determinants of success? And if you can't figure those out, go and find people in the industry you think you want to go into and read about them. And what things did they do? See, I don't believe in heroes. I believe in extracting from certain people certain traits and characteristics. I love Churchill's perseverance. I really don't want to drink like he drinks. So, I extracted from Churchill, never give up. Okay, that was it. And when these leadership skills and communication skills are key, by the way. But each industry, again, requires different kinds of communication skill. Some requires real writing, and some requires bullet points. And if you're a bullet point person, don't go into a writing business, And if you're a writing person, don't go into a bullet point business. So those things kind of fit together. And you can go to people and ask them, what are the characteristics of your business? And if you've written them down, you can ask them the different parts of their business. Some require a lot of travel, but you have to find out your own passions first, so that then you can decide what you want to do with those passions. And passions, by its overused word, it's passions, talents, and those things have to be put into the context of the day. If you love making buggy whips, you're in trouble. But if you want to make, space capsules, you're probably in good shape. See what I'm saying? Find out what context. Think of the next 40 or 50 years that you're going to live in. How are you going to get the wind at your back? What's going to really grow? What need has to be satisfied? Where is the latent demand? And it can come. I supposedly founded a golf course. They give me too much credit. But when I decided to find a golf course, there was the enormous latent demand for golf. When we started charging, the entry fee for the golf, people say, you're crazy. You can't get that. No, nobody gets that kind of money. We sold, 300 memberships in about 90 days because there's just enormous demand for us. We found a need that had to be satisfied. Talking to this guy today about Alzheimer's, if you have any interest in that at all, solving that is one of America's great problems. If we don't solve it, we're going to have 35 or 40 million people. And if you have any friends, I have 6 of them now. I say a prayer every morning for them. People just don't die. They just don't recognize anybody. It's very expensive for society, and it's just so sad for families. I have half and half, 3 men and 3 women, and I just feel for them. So long answer, write things down, but take your passions, principles, partners, write those plans down, and try to define early on what industry or area you want to go into, and what are the characteristics of that particular industry, and then go and find. You may find once you decide that it's not for you, like me. I really wanted to be an international businessman. Nothing excited me more than speaking French and Spanish. I thought that was absolutely unbelievable. I actually had a little Japanese from the Navy, and I really love languages. I love communicating with people that were in my country, but it wasn't business. There was no business out there. It was something that I wouldn't make much progress. My wind was not my back was in my face. My face for almost 20 years, between 1960 and 1980, 85, international business was very difficult and complicated.
There's someone who has another question about parenting. They said single parent households and a percentage of all households has grown dramatically over the past several years. Do you see this as a problem for society?
Absolutely. I think I have a number. I wouldn't want you to quote me, but I think less than 50% of people now are married. I think that's the number that's come through. I guess, again, you're old school. There'll be some new technologies on how to handle single parents or people that decided not to get married and so forth. And there's some young people now that I know that have children that are not married, and it's working out. So but it may take a while. But I think it really is a problem for society. I find I'm mixed up in this group called Wiley in Boston, which counsels kids from foster homes. A woman named Judy King is absolutely spectacular. And what she does is she has a counselor. These kids who come into the organization, they have to talk to the counselor once a week, the same as a parent. And then I have a fellow down in Houston who took over the Houston school systems, and he put an advertisement in the papers for mentors. He got 2,500 mentors. He attached these mentors to the worst schools in Houston. And all of a sudden, these schools turned around. Why? These kids had somebody to talk to, not periodic, regularly, once a week. You have to talk to someone. And so when you get a problem, you don't start to fall behind. So this is really a problem. And I think it's a problem if you go into any of the kids. There's some people and by the way, at the wealthy end of the spectrum, the same problem. The same problem occurred where the husband and wife are both in this, self-work family community. They're in this work area. And children recognize that they're not important. They think they're not important. And then they start to lose their way. Even if when you'll find that happens with kids with too much money and too much capability, the parents become not associated. You have to spend the time. This balance that I'm talking about, if you want to live a successful life, it's not easy. It's a juggling act. You got to keep moving back and forth. But that family side, unfortunately, I mean, I was taught that it was quality time. And as I've learned, it's not quality time, it's time. You have to allocate the time. And you got to keep checking out to see whether it's enough time. And if your work takes too much time, you got to say, I'm going to do this for a while, and I'm going to go back here and solve this problem in family. Or you're going to do what I try to do, is really have intense vacations. Really, 10 days in Africa, 10 days at the tip of Chile, 10 days on a boat in the Caribbean, where dinner one day is lunch the next day. It's not expensive, cheaper than a hotel. And you bring people together, or find a cabin in the woods someplace in the Appalachians, and go with your children and spend time. It's time. It's very, very important, because you can go. And I believe marriage is the same way. I'm a great marriage counselor. I recommend young marrieds, get this, take a car trip every year, at least 4 days. You know what happens on a car trip? First day is terrible. Nothing works. By the end of the fourth day, you've discussed everything. You've had adventures. Barbara and I were up in Alaska, and we put the car out in the back of the motel, and the bears came the next morning and ate the roof off the car to try to get what was in the back seat. These things, you can't make these things up. But a car trip with your wife, and I took a car trip with my wife almost every summer. The kids would go to camp, and I'd take her on in a car. Two of us in a car, discuss everything, get everything down. From what to money and to so forth, what was going on. And you get to the point where it's almost a habit. So I think that this idea of allocation of time, now single parents who are not married, you're finding a lot of our Djokovic has a baby, and there's some of the great golfers have families, babies. They're working out. It's working a little bit different. I'm hoping they have the technology to make it work. I won't be around to find out, but I believe in this concept of a shared responsibility. I mean, I'm not afraid 2 men can do it, 2 women can do it. That doesn't bother me. It just requires more than one person, because one person will be taken away into work or community even, and it doesn't leave the time for the family, so the other person can fill that in. And there are periods of my life that Barbara really was, I hate to say it, totally responsible for the family. And we made that deal. I said to her, these next 2 or 3 years are going to be, hell on wheels. But we always plan. I recommend strongly that you plan vacations with the family. Get used to it. I took my 3-year-old. We lost the babysitter. We were going to Mexico, and I was 2.5 years old. And we took him to Puerto Vallarta, and it was a crazy experience. But taking him with us. The first time was hard. The second time was easier, and it went pretty well. You get used to it. It's they cry, or they don't like what's going on, or but after a while it becomes a real experience. And we still do that. This Christmas there'll be 11 of us on a boat in the Caribbean.
It's funny you say that, because my fiance and I, we were dating for maybe 6 months, and we hadn't had a chance to go off island together. We both live here year round. So our first vacation together was we got our car off island, and we drove to South Carolina. And the last day we had to get back and get the boat. So we left South Carolina at 7 a.m. and drove all the way back to Hyannis. And it was, I called it an odyssey when we got back. People said, "Oh, how was your time away?" And I said it was an odyssey.
You just remembered it, right? And it was, it'll be something. It's, we drove in Norway once, and I was up in the hills, and I was driving. This doesn't look good. She says, "Yes, because you're on a walking path." No. The car trip is a good thing. Boat trip, but and I recommend that a couple things for marriage. One, don't go more than 3 months, and every once in a while, do something just because. Mm-hmm. I send my wife flowers just because. Just or something like that, so she knows you thought of her. I think, or those kinds of things. Because you have what I call 2 pots. You want to put chips in those pots, because sooner or later you're going to take some out because you make some mistakes. So
yeah,
this is wonderful. You get me into real deep stuff now. Be careful.
It's my life coaching hat coming on.
Right.
Does anyone have any other comments or questions? We have a lot of grateful comments in the chat. Someone recommends you read The Ninth Hour by Alice McDermott. I can email it to you so you have
Please
it.
do email it to me. I have your
I
pencils.
will.
Good.
And a lot of thank yous and thank yous.
Well, that's good. But please be nasty. Ask a real tough one, you know. Laura Fark said, "Thank you for the wonderful talk." That's phony. She's a relative, so that's all right.
Scott has a question. You have a full bookcase behind you. Do you have a few favorite books you can recommend?
Well, I just started into reading, Leon Uris and Ken Follett because I'm a very slow reader, and Audible has changed my life. The last 5 years, I've read a couple hundred books basically on things that I didn't read as an engineer, and so my favorite books. Howard Stevenson wrote a book called Just Enough, which I'm very enthusiastic about, where he basically talks, there's just enough money, just enough work, he's very good at that. Then there's Malcolm Gladwell's David and Goliath, which is, I think, a great book, laying out a couple of things, where disadvantages become advantages, which is part of my whole story. If you have disadvantages and you can make them advantages, like mine did, like adaptability. If you change your life, I did 15 or 20 different places before you're 18, you become adaptable. You go from one schoolyard to the next, you learn how to adapt or else, but Malcolm Gladwell. But I really, I love, historical fiction, because it's my, I suppose I'm anal a little bit, and I get a little bit of history. I really didn't do history. I thought history was memorizing facts, but I'm understanding history is so important to everything you do. So if historical fiction is kind of a spoonful of sugar, makes the medicine go down. So I love historical fiction. Ken Follett does it for the fifth, from the 9th century to the present time, and Uris does it all over the world. So those are the two people. Howard Stevenson, Harvard Business School, has written a number of books, not only about life, but also about giving, philanthropy. Warren McFarland's book on giving is a very important one at Harvard Business School. Let's see. What am I? I'm reading a lot of books now, like about China. I think that's one of the most important things people can do today, because if you read Graham Allison's book called Thucydides' Trap, it lays out the last 2,500 years how there's been a rising nation and a ruling nation and what happens. So Thucydides' Trap is a great book, and you can follow that on with the 100-Year Marathon, which talks about China. And then most recent book, I think that you've got to understand China to understand the world now. They are, a society with 4 times as many people, a totally different mentality toward planning and operations. So we've got to really understand. So that I could go on. I love to read. I usually read 2 or 3 books at a time, because I think that is really, and then this Audible, if you're a slow reader like I am, I was dyslexic as a child. The Audible, I walk every day, and so I used to hate to walk. Now I love to walk. Stick those things in my ears and off I go.
There's an excerpt from your book. I just want to read this one paragraph because it's very kind to librarians. It's when you're talking about you're in college and you're working many different jobs, and some of the jobs included waiting tables, and also removing railroad ties from abandoned railroad lines. So you say, at one job I had during the summer between my junior and senior years, I waited tables at a Bob's Big Boy restaurant from 6 p.m. until 1 a.m. When I got off work, I would sleep for a few hours and then head over to the university library, where I helped with various tasks during the day. It was a perfect job because when I wasn't busy, I could doze off. One morning, however, a librarian caught me sleeping. "Shh, don't wake him up. He works nights," I heard her whisper to our colleague. I will always remember what a kind lady she was.
And she was a kind lady. She was a kind lady because, I at the end of the summer, I said to her, I apologize. I said, I know you caught me sleeping. She said, don't worry about it. It was just a wonderful lady. Well, that's what you do. You collect, and in writing the book, I collected a lot of people. I look back at the foster experience, and I said, wasn't very good. But the last foster family, when I went back and I read those letters, Mr. and Mrs. Robb were a model for me. They were a model family. They were warm, comfortable. She wanted me to play the piano. She was interested. She wanted to put weight on me. She was really a wonderful lady. She only had one child. She couldn't have any more. And so I was her second child. She treated me just like her son. So that was a model for me. And along the way, I've collected, because of my background, I became very independent. I don't want to trust anybody, didn't take anybody's advice. But writing this book has helped me that even though I thought I was doing that, I actually was collecting traits from people that I used later on. And it was the headmaster, or the key guy at the second orphanage did everything possible to help me. And I always rejected all his capability, except the little scholarship he gave me when I graduated. I took that. He was a wonderful man, and he had really good advice and so forth. But I really didn't trust anybody, and it was negative. It was really negative, and that's why people have asked me, would you be, if you didn't have this background, would you have been able to accomplish as much as you did? And I always say no. And then I start thinking about it. I might have been able to accomplish more because I picked up a lot of demons. I picked up anger along the way. I was angry. I mean, why me? Why am I in this situation? Where I don't have the right clothes, and I'm an orphan. Nobody else is. And I was angry. Luckily, and there's another one I tell people, kids like myself, direct that anger internally, help you drive toward where you're going. Don't ever let it get external. Don't get angry to other people. My father was always angry to other people because he basically felt that he was mistreated by the world. He lost everything, and he never really gave up that anger. And it was always external. And I learned that was a bad idea. Same thing with my boss at Lehman Brothers. I don't know what was the matter with him. I kept asking him, "What's wrong with you, Lou?" Because he was angry at everybody, and never did you any good. You get angry at your tennis racket, at your golf club. Don't get angry at anybody.
Yeah. I see one more question, and then I think this will be our last one. We'll wrap up. Someone asks, what modern business leaders or CEOs would you recommend listening to and extracting traits from for a young person?
Top of the list is Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan. He does it all, okay? He really does it all. I used to say Bill Gates, but given what's happened to his family, I'm not as comfortable with that recommendation. Bill, has done such a spectacular job at business and a community. He's got two of these things pretty well nailed. And I thought, I didn't know his background, so getting divorced doesn't. The whole process doesn't excite me, but Bill's a spectacular guy and has done a lot for society, all over the world. But Jamie Dimon characterized it all. There was a man named Ace Greenberg at Bear Stearns who wrote a couple of books about different expressions about people can use. So I'm very much in favor of everybody having these list of sayings that they live by. And Ace Greenberg was the CEO and chairman of Bear Stearns before they fell, but long before they had their problems. And he was a business leader that I thought was very special. Larry Bossidy, Honeywell. There's these people are out there. Trying to think of others that again, I know more about the financial people than the manufacturing and the woman who runs General Motors, Mary Barra, is very worthwhile looking at. She's very exciting, and Jane Fraser at Citibank too. To me, is pretty exciting person and very interesting. So there are a couple of female executives now that I would put on my list. But those are the top of my list. But you see, I'm mainly in finance. This is where I have my capability. I'm not as knowledgeable. The best book I ever read was by Andy Grove, and I'm very impressed by him. Only the paranoid survive, and he basically, although I claim it, he probably was the guy who had what's next first. Only the paranoid survive if you don't pay attention to what's happening in your environment. What's next? And he used the paranoid survive. So Andy Grove is one of my heroes as well. And then for the rest of a lot of the people, what you want to do is not take one person, but take the talent that they have. I mean, Steve Jobs is like Winston Churchill. You want his creativity. You want his understanding of the market. You don't want to get anywhere near his personality. So that's what I tell people is try to extract. And in many respects, one of my great reasons for my own existence was the movies. When I was a child, John Wayne never did anything wrong. He never did. The only thing they usually did at the end of every movie, they smoked a cigarette and died. But in these war movies and so forth. But these heroes, and when I was a young man, they were heroes, really, and they did everything right. But as soon as you get to this particular part of society, people didn't question it, by the way. Just like you didn't question your father in those days. Your father, no matter what he said, was right. Today, that's finished. That's old school. But today, try to extract from each one of these leaders their special capability. And then you want to copy that's fine. Then try to put that mosaic together if you can pull it off. That'd be my advice to people. There are a lot of very, very good executives out there that are dealing, especially in technology today, which I'm not terribly familiar with. The person who runs Microsoft now, very special guy, really understands business, really knows how to do things. So I would say mainly find someone you're interested in, try to find the talent that you think causes him to be successful or her, and pull that away and say, can I copy that? I hope that's a good answer.
One book that we both love, I think, is Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. He wrote another book, Peaks and Valleys. I don't know if you've ever read it.
I have a whole library full of Ken Blanchard and Johnson. Everything done exercise. That's my first book, which will come out second. If this one's successful, I really wanted to write a short, book with a kind of an allegory into it.
And that's what's so powerful. What he said in an interview, someone asked him, why is your book so relatable? Why do people like it? And he said, well, people don't want to necessarily be told what to do, but if you give them a story, then they can pull out the pieces that are really relevant and important to them. And your book does something very similar. It's really a story. And there's some lessons. There's times where you come out and say, hey, this is the lesson I got. But a lot of it's just following along and being like, wow, he really stumbled there. Or, whoa, that really worked out for him. And just being able to follow the story and relate to what's meaningful to you.
Thank you. You got the exact essence of what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a how-to-do book, but, here's what happened. And if it fits for you, maybe there's a lesson there. I actually have a third book. It's 32 chapters. Each one is a six-page lesson, which I'm going to try to, and I may not ever print this book, but it was a book that I wrote along the way that didn't ring well with me. I basically came down and write an autobiography because I want people to say, and by the way, the great extra satisfaction when I get out of this book, people relate their life to my book. And they say, I did this. I had this experience. Or, I didn't quite have this experience, but this is how I felt. You felt the same way. And it allows them to think about themselves, which is really an added extra for me. I mean, one of my friends said, I was an orphan, but I never told anybody. You're only the third person I've told. Made him feel good. He could talk about it. A young lady said to me, I grew up in a foster home. I didn't tell anybody. I want to talk to you. Because, today's world's a little different. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. And, it's at my stage of life, golf game is starting to slip a little bit, a lot actually. But, what are you going to do? And if you can give a few young people or even anybody a little bit of advice that actually helps, well, you're a coach, you know what it is. You can really change people's lives. You can really send them in the right direction. And I get that all the time. I mean, people, my scholarship students say, Ed, we use the 4 Ps, Reverend Cool, the Reverend up at the University of Rochester, uses my 4 questions for marriage, which is, my son-in-law came to me and he said, I want to marry your daughter. I said, well, Jimmy, you got to love my daughter. That has nothing, it's an emotional thing. There's nothing, they have to feel it. Second of all, you got to be committed. Nothing to do with love. It's an intellectual decision. I'm committed. Third, you have to be willing to compromise. Very important. 2 come together. And then finally, Jimmy, you're going to have to sacrifice. And you're in your life, one of these moments, you're going to have to sacrifice something you really don't want to do. And he said, okay. So I let him marry my daughter.
I think we'll wrap up now. Do you have a final thought or anything you want to add that I didn't ask or say as we head out?
The only final thought I want to is that I really think that we all have to get behind the idea that America is a great country, and it's the first country in the history of the world where anybody can do anything he or she wants to do with a right amount of nation and a little hard work and a little bit of luck. And we have to tell people there's more opportunity today than ever before. And each one of us, I think, at a certain stage of our life, ought to figure out, what they want to give back to. Because you don't have to have a lot of money. You can find something to make a difference. And if you make that difference, trust me, it's the greatest thing that could ever happen to you. I mean, today, of all the things I've done, I'm happy in the kids that I've helped go through school and the letters that I get back. And I got a letter from Belgium the other day. This girl's a PhD in biomedical engineering, and she's working on something, and it's a great thing. And I started very early on, and it doesn't take a lot, but you can find something at your church or your school, Boys and Girls Club. A friend of mine is a big Boys and Girls Club person. He does it all over the Southeast, and just terrific satisfaction out of that. So that's my last thought. And then please, if you read my book, I would appreciate it very much if you put a little rating and a review on Amazon. My publisher asked me to do that, so I'm doing that. And what I really want everybody to do is to give this book to young people. I'm trying to get. A friend of mine just bought 1,700 books to give to all his young people, and the other person bought 2,500 books to give to all his scholarship students. And if my name wasn't on it, I'd push it even harder. But my name is unfortunately on. I'm a little bit bashful about this whole process. But if you look at my life, I basically made all the mistakes you can make and still made it through.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ed. This was really lovely. I really liked getting to know a little bit more.
You're just saying that. You're so nice. Thank everybody for listening to. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming, and go out and buy the book, and have a wonderful evening. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.